to address this 5 million, so it's more spread out over the long-term financial plan. And so in the interim, what we do is either we have to postpone the repair or the replacement until reserve is available, or we rely on grant or grant funding. And if we can't do that, or we want to use debt strategically, we do use debt funding in the interim. And council has done that in the past on a couple of projects recently. And so in addition, though, staff is also monitoring grant opportunities, and we look at our any applicable grants that may apply to any of the projects we have in our capital plan and how they align. So we're always seeking out grant opportunities. But I did want to bring that sort of backlog spike to your attention, so you know why we're basically using up our reserves as we're collecting them. And so for the long-term financial plan, I've based the operations costs on the preliminary budget for 2022. I then inflate that out over the long term. For capital, the first 5 years are based on the preliminary 5-year capital plan that Director of Infrastructure is going to be presenting later on in the meeting. And then for 2027 onward, what we do is we base it on the annual cost for asset replacement. And so that's based on that graph, the assets listed in the graph that I just showed you previously, as well as the unit costs. And so the 100-year average of funds that we need every year to have on hand is about $790,000 for the water fund. And this is up from $640,000 last year. And this is really reflecting updated asset inventory, as well as a increase in unit costs. And this is really, for water, we have expanded infrastructure as part of the Zone 3 expansion project. And so we have additional assets that we are going to have to, in future, repair and replace. But, the really good news story for the water is that part of that Zone 3 aquifer expansion is when we hit our peak, we were paying almost $300,000 a year for bulk water from the RD. And so that money is now freed up because we no longer have to spend that money on purchasing bulk water. And we have dropped that cost down to only about $10,000 for right now. We still do rely on the regional district for fire flow, and eventually we're going to be relying on them for peak demand. But in the meantime, that cost is really low. And so this is enabling us to, build those reserves. It more than covers the debt servicing costs for that $3.3 million that was required for that project. And it also provides funding available for additional operational costs that we have now that we have more infrastructure and operations to supply the entire town with the aquifer water. So it's good news all around there. And so this one, you're going to remember this from last year. This is the basically graphic representation of all the numbers in the long-term financial plan. And so it's a busy slide, but I'll just refresh your memories. The vertical bars at the front, those are revenue sources. The blue and green horizontal layers at the back, those are expenses. And you're going to see on the left-hand side, there's the Zone 3 project cost and the debt funding. So the spike there in 2020 was the first part of that project. This mountain type here in 2022, that is the completion of the well 6 that we have planned for this year. And so also part of this graph, our two reserves that we have for targets. There's our operational reserve, and that includes the rate stabilization. And then here's a combination of our capital and ops target reserve target. And so this black line is the one that's important in terms of this shows how much cash we have on hand to be able to spend on asset replacement every year and operations. And so what we want to do is have this black line up at a level where we have enough to address our capital and operational needs. We are sort of hovering along the bottom. I am really pleased that we're continuously above our operational reserve. And the reason we're hovering along here is that basically as we collect the funds, we are spending them and trying to address that backlog that we've got. So we need an annual of $790,000 per year once we even address the backlog. So we're getting there with the water plan. And so this is consistent with last year, where I recommended that we have a 5% annual rate increase until 2026. So good news, no change there. So I'd like to recommend that we're continuing with the 5% for 2022 and onward 2026. And the one change that increased annual cost has is that this target right here, last year that was 2 years sooner than it is now. So it is a bit putting us a bit more vulnerable in that we're not going to reach that target as soon. But I am still recommending the 5% this year, and I'll explain that why a bit later. Okay. And so again, goal is to build sufficient reserves. So we're limiting our dependency on grant and debt funding. So as mentioned, the proposed parcel tax and user fee rate increases for 2022 is recommended to be 5%. And again, that's consistent with last year. And that 5% is a combination of 2% inflationary impacts and 3% for asset replacement. And I know, although inflation right now has been pretty significant, that 2% we're looking over a 100-year period. So we average it out over the long term. So we keep it at 2% and smooth out these spikes that we're getting right recently. And then again, as mentioned, I recommend to continue with this overall 5% until 2026. And so to give committee and attendees an idea of how this is going to impact an individual household. So I've picked a sample single family residential property, and with water, it really depends on how much water a property uses. So I'm sticking with the same amount of water that I used last year in the example. And so in this case, it's a residential property that uses 320 cubic meters of water per year. And so for that property, the increase, a 5% increase, translates into just over $43 per year over last year. And this is for the parcel taxes and the user fees combined. And so the value, though, increases because that 300, the value of the cost is really dependent on how much water use is used. It does vary by water user as well as user type. So commercial generally use more water, so they're going to see a higher amount. And for a residential household, say that's very, very considerate with their water or just has 1 or 2 people in there, they're going to see a lower range. But I did want to stick with the amount that I had provided for last year. So if people want to get a sense of how this 5% might impact them and where they would sit either above or below this $43, can take a look at the utility bills. And we publish the water consumption on the utility bills. And so you can see we do a 6-month period. You can basically double that and see where you're at in compared to 320. And that'll give you a sense if you're above or below this $43 increase that would take effect this year. And so over the longer term, so I'm looking out over the 5 years of the next financial plan that council would adopt this as part of this year's budget cycle. So over the next 5 years, if we kept that 5% increase going, total increase for water and sewer parcel for this residential property is 320 cubic meters of water use per year is just over $239. And that's an average of about $47.86 per year. And again, that's really dependent on how much water the household uses. I mean, there are fixed charges in the water utility billing as well as the parcel tax, but there is a component, of course, with water where it's based on use, so that amount's going to fluctuate. But that's an example to give you a sense of what it would look like over 5 years. And so that is the summary for the water long-term financial plan. I'm just going to stop there and see if anyone has any questions before I move on to sanitary sewer.
Thank you, Director. Council, does Council have any questions? Director, I'm not seeing any specific recommendation arising from this. Is there one that comes later in the agenda package? I don't see it there either for the 5% increase.
The 5% increase. So at this point, what I do, and it is similar approach last year, is that present the information to council, the preliminary budgets with embedded 5% increase in the operational budgets. And then I bring a report to council on February the 15th with the formal recommendation for council to adopt that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that clarity.
Yeah. Okay. Councilor Diandret.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question that's going to show up later. What does SCADA means? I can never remember.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I'm sorry about the acronyms. We have so many of them. I'm going to ask Director of Infrastructure to come in and clarify that for us. Please, Dave.
You betcha. supervisory control and data acquisition. And so what that means is supervisory control. It controls all our wells and our operations in the plant as well. And so, for example, reservoir water level drops down to a certain point, the SCADA will pick it up and signal the pump station to turn on. And so it's a way of everything communicating together. The data acquisition part of SCADA is just that it records data on how much water is pumped, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of the brains of the outfit, excluding staff. That was supposed to be complimentary to staff. Don't know if it came across that way.
Okay, thank you. No further questions there. We'll go on to 3.2, which is the preliminary 2022 preliminary sewer operating budget. No,
Okay.
sorry,
Yeah.
water operating budget.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, we're still on 3.1. I just want to run through the sewer long-term financial plan for the committee.
Okay, fine. Yep, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
yes, you're right. Yeah, I see it there. Yeah.
yeah. I combine these two into one, just to figure
Yeah.
it's easier to have the long-term plans in one spot.
You're right.
Okay, thank you. So this one is very familiar with you as well, and it also goes along the same premise as the water, so a bit of repetition, but bear with me because there are some differences here. And so again, we're looking to have a fund that limits our dependency on grant and debt funding and really, gives us enough reserves to meet our short and long-term needs, both operationally and capital. And we do have the same 3 type of reserve targets that we're aiming for the sanitary sewer. Again, operations reserve, that's to address any unexpected breakdowns and enable us to have funds on hand that we can address those right away. The rate stabilization, and for the sanitary sewer fund, it's only 5% because these are fixed rates, flat rates at this time. And so there's not as much fluctuation on use because it's a flat rate per property. So we don't need quite as much of a rate stabilization there. The variation for revenues would come with a change of use in a property. And then the third one, again, is the capital reserve. And again, we keep that at a 3% for total asset replacement value. And again, this will enable us to have the funds on hand for future asset renewal and replacement instead of relying on debt. And so I wanted to provide this similar graph again for sanitary sewer for the committee to see. And so this is the asset replacement schedule. And this is both based on the latest inventory that's been provided by the Infrastructure Services Department. And so again, this is an 80-year view of this. And you're going to notice this far left spike again. And this again is our backlog. It's often called an infrastructure gap. And for sanitary sewer, it's almost $12 million. So, pretty significant. That's about 23% of the assets are still in use, but past their expected useful lives. And so as similar with water, the vast majority of these are underground linear related assets. And so again, the catch up here requires that we use the reserves as quickly as we can collect them. And in the absence of that, we either have to postpone replacement or repair until reserve or grant funding is available, or if we cannot do that, then we rely on grant funding. So the backlog here does make us a bit vulnerable until we can get caught up on that. Council, though, has used strategic use of debt to address some of these issues. And the most recent one would have been the Prowse Road lift station upgrade. That was a pretty critical infrastructure we needed to get upgraded, and debt was used for that. And it worked out really well. And also for same with sanitary sewer, staff is always looking for grant opportunities for these kind of projects that might align with our capital plan, so we can use grant funding when it's available. All right, so for the sanitary sewer, same thing, but slightly different on this one. So operations, again, based on the 2022 preliminary budget, and then I forecast out from there. Capital, the first 5 years is based on the 5-year capital plan that's going to be presented later in the meeting. And then the 2027 to 2035, we're gradually increasing up to the annual costs for asset replacement. If we did it right away, it would require a very significant, a significant rate increase. And so to keep at the 5%, we're doing a gradual increase over to reach up to this new level. And we did this previously as well. And so the 100-year average, the new 100-year average is just over $1 million, up from 950,000. And again, this reflects updated inventory and the updated unit costs that was able to be provided by infrastructure this year. All right, so here is the graphic representation of the plan, all the numbers behind the plan. So again, the vertical is revenue, the blue and green is the operations and expense costs. You can see again, here's our blue, our a dotted line for the operations reserve, and we are hovering above that, which again, really great news. Previously, we struggled with that before we put this long-term financial plan in place. The capital now is quite high up here, and that's the 1.035 million. And the black line here is again our targets. You're seeing with the sanitary sewer, with water, we reached this black line, hit the target level. It was 2036, and now you're seeing where this is. We're not even going to get there past 2040. So this is the sort of the vulnerability that we have. It's going to take us longer to reach that target unless we put in higher rate increases. For now, though, I'm recommending we stick with a minimum 5-year until at least 2030, and I'll go into that a bit longer in just a moment. And so on here, you're going to see 2 spikes. On the left-hand side, there's a lift station and the treatment plant upgrade and the debt funding. And this is a new one, this spike here in 2023. And that is our capital program that is going to be discussed later in the meeting. But in that, we're going to be requiring some debt funding in order to do those 2 projects. So Dave can go through those in more detail. And again, we're at 1.035 million for over the long-term financial plan. Let's see, before I move on. Yeah, so what we're seeing, so the reasoning, one of the reasons why we're struggling a bit to get up to the capital line is that we're seeing some increased costs at an operational level. And that money would previously have been left over and then used for capital. And so Infrastructure Services Department, they're reviewing the operations to see if these increased costs are going to be ongoing or whether they're associated with more one-time or catch-up items. So until we have a bit more information on that, I don't want to recommend a higher increase until we have a bit more information. And until then, we are a bit more vulnerable, but I think it's worth taking a bit of time to gather a bit more information until we have that. All right, so the proposed rate increase is going to stick to the 5% for 2022, and this is consistent with what I presented with you last year as well. And again, there's the breakdown of 2% and 3% long-term inflationary, as well as the asset replacement. And in this plan at this point, continue with this increase until 2030. So again, it's a bit longer than we had with water, but we may need to look at that again next year. And then, one of the main differences between water and sanitary sewer, at the very beginning of the long-term financial plans, water was in pretty dire straits. So council supported some pretty significant increases at the very beginning, 10 and 15%. And that gave us quite a boost at the beginning, where sanitary sewer wasn't it wasn't as urgent at that point. So I think the highest increase was 9 and went gradually down from there. But so we didn't have that same boost. And that's why one of the reasons we're seeing a bit of a divergence from where we are with the water fund at this point. And so to give an idea of single family residential property, this one's a bit easier because we do charge a flat rate for sewer. And so a 5% increase for a single family residential is $33.62 increase over 2021. And that is a combination of parcel taxes and user fees, and that's for the entire year. And then over the 5-year financial plan that council does adopt as part of the budget process, over that 5 years, if we stick to the 5%, that would be a total of just over $185,000. And that's an average of about $37.15 per year. And again, that's a combination of parcel taxes and user fees combined. So I did want to give you a bit of the longer view on what those increases, the impacts on those increases would be. And so that's what I have for sanitary sewer. Oh, and sorry, one more comment. So I'm giving you example for the single family residential property, but as with water, similarly, it's going to change based on user type. So this is residential, but commercial, they have a different rate structure, different types of charges for different types of businesses. So these increases will be different for commercial versus residential. So that is it for the sanitary sewer, and I will stop again here if anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much. Lorraine, would you go back to the last graph, please? The one that shows the revenue, that one there, please. Thank you. I guess one of the questions I have is we are doing a significant amount of development, or there's a significant amount of development happening in the community with Parkland and Eagle View and Venture Way and eventually Gospel Rock. Now, those infrastructures should be relatively new in those project areas, which means they shouldn't require a lot of support in the short term. Yet they are going to generate revenue for us. Well, is that revenue kind of anticipated in this graph here, the increased revenue from the properties that say the next 5 years will come online?
So what we do for the, let's see, for the user fee, so the long-term financial plan embedded in it, it has an increase for population growth. So it's not specific to those particular properties, but in terms of just general population growth. The other area that comes in revenue wise, so we'll see an increase in user fees and in parcel taxes and that way. Yep. But the other area where it comes in is our development cost charge revenue that we do. Yep. And we have not, Dave and I have talked about this over the years, and we don't want to count our chickens before they're hatched. So we do put some money in there, but we don't want to presuppose the timing of that because it's so timing dependent. So once we do, we have updated the annual average amount that we can comfortably think, if just general development, what we might get. But the spikes for the larger developments, they will come in, and you're right, they're going to make a significant difference in this. And so we will add those in once we receive them. But it's going to make a big difference for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions from council? Councillor Lumley.
Thank you. Thanks, Lorraine. My one question would be the flat rate versus some sort of system more like water usage. I can only assume if I guess, and I could be wrong, but I could only assume even based on these graphs, like the cost for sanitary and sewer collection is higher than the cost for water, like provision, like to provide water, the cost of sanitary, and it would only make sense that that's just the way it is. But the sanitary has a fixed rate and is a lower per single family use than actual providing water to the family. And I can only assume that maybe people that are using more water, they're actually using a larger stake in our sanitary supply or the cost of sanitary sewer. My question would be, I guess, why would we not, if the costs are higher, and clearly the infrastructure updates are much higher, why wouldn't sanitary be a higher household income cost than just providing water?
Right.
I don't know if that makes any sense. I would just assume that someone that uses more water just puts a bigger load on our sanitary system. I don't know why they would get the benefit of a fixed cost. They should probably be paying more than somebody that uses less water. That's just it seems more common sense to me. Is there a reason we stick with a flat rate instead of a user rate?
Yeah, thanks for that. So back when we first moved on to, I'm not sure who was around for this, but back when we first moved from flat water charges, because it used to be just a flat rate, and we put in the residential water metering program, and then we moved to a user-based one, we had a lot of fluctuations in our revenue at the very beginning. And initially, the council at the time and staff at the time had intended to convert the sewer charges to be consistent with how we charge water. So basically, it's a metered basis. But there was so much fluctuation in the revenue at the time, we sort of backed away from that. And so I've been waiting, and it's interesting because it's in the back of my mind. How do I time this, recommendation to council in terms of I ideally would like to move over to sewer that's more consistent with how we charge for water. And so it would be a metered rate, and it would be generally it's based on the winter use. Because then you're not capturing water that's going out into the landscaping. So it is on my radar. The one thing that we did notice at previous council, when that report was brought to previous council about the impacts, there's some, it's going to take some adjustment. Transitions are always quite challenging, especially when it comes to applying, taxes and user fees, and the water metering was quite a transition. So again, it would be a transition for the sanitary sewer. So it's definitely in my mind, just rumbling around as to what the best timing would that be for the community.
Councilor Lumley, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Timing's
Yeah, okay.
the timing's good right now. I don't know. Anyway, but thanks, Lauren. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Nice to know it's in the back of your mind.
Councilor Diandrat?
Thank you. Yeah, really good point. And just on the same topic, because my only concern of taking just the winter average is for many people, there's not too much movement in winter. They might even go away. And summer, we have lots of Airbnbs and etc. So I understand that there's a percentage that people might use in their garden, so therefore they won't be using the sewage system. But I don't know. I feel a little bit. I don't know if just counting during the winter would be a good reflection of the year. I'll leave like that. But
yeah, thank you, Councillor Diandrade. You're hitting on the complexities of metered sewer, right? I mean, we don't want to penalize people that are watering their yards because that doesn't go into our sanitary sewer system. But you're right, we do have people that are not here in the winter, and winter use is significantly, for residential especially, is lower than summer. So anyway, it's a complex one. So it is going to take some time on a staffing end. And, for me, timing, capacity wise is I have to time it as well. So we make sure that we can do the research and bring some options to council for discussion and have some options there to try and address those issues that are going to come up. Yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. And thank you for the report. It's I think it's something that it's important that people are really aware of what we're trying to do to be able to provide these essential services. But with respect to the timing, with going back to Councillor Lumley's initial question, is this something that the timing might be phased in with the 2023 proposed capital project to help bring down the amount of debt borrowing that might be incurred with that project?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, the transition, so that would be if council was looking at gathering more revenue, so that would be so when we convert to fixed to sort of more user pay system, initially it would be keeping the revenue at the same level, and then overall we would have to increase the rates to capture more revenue. So that's definitely part of it. I don't know if I could actually get that in place by 2023, because part of it also is education and communication in advance to residents. We learned a lot in the transition from flat water to metered water. And, one of the ones was, again, communication, giving people a heads up of, here's what your bill is now, here's what your bill is going to look like in, next year, if and when council goes to metered sanitary. So I would want some time to communicate that ahead of time and give people a bit of a heads up. And also, we're going to need some time to, it's going to take some, again, some changes in our processes in the back end in terms of software upgrading and testing all that. And then as well as determining what is the best structure to capture as fair as we can, user pay. And again, as with water, it should have a flat rate component to it, but then have a portion that is metered as well. And of course, the parcel taxes won't change either. So, yeah, it's a big project. Yeah.
Right, could you go to the previous chart now?
For the water, you mean?
Yes, or for sanitary sewer or water, they're both the same. That not keep scrolling back. Nope, past it.
There we go.
The graph, yeah. With the asset replacement schedule, one thing I think that would enhance this presentation in a nutshell would be to take that $12 million on that, which is on the kind of the outstanding looming giant projects there, and break that down on a page so that people can look at that and say, okay, here are the things that are needed to be done. And then this becomes kind of they don't have to look for that information somewhere else. It would have to change that annually, of course, but it would be interesting to see what that list entails. What's all involved in that $12 million?
Okay, that's great. I might be able to convert that. So on the website version, I could potentially add a slide that would give you a bit more breakdown for that, for water and sewer. Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful to people to see that, and then so that you say these are kind of outstanding projects that we need to catch up on before we get a handle on this.
Certainly, I will look into that. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before we move on to the next presentation, does council have anything else? Okay, we'll go now then to the where I was before, page 3.2, and this is again Director of Finance, the 2022 preliminary water operating budget.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So let's see. So preliminary water budget. All right. So I'm just going to give a high level overview of this one. And that way that'll allow the committee to ask questions. We do have staff, infrastructure services staff available to answer questions on the details of the operations. So water operating revenue is budgeted just over $2 million for 2022. And this is an overall increase of about $181,000 as compared to last year. The bulk of it is the parcel taxes and user fees. And so this year, we're going to see an increase in users due to development. And so we've had an additional 54 parcels come online since 2021, as compared to last year. And eventually we charge the parcel taxes right away. And then as those properties get developed, then the user fees kick in as well. So there'll be some revenue in there. The rate increase, as mentioned, I'm recommending an overall 5% to parcel taxes and user fees. And that was the rationale which is provided in the long-term financial plan presentation. Over on the expense side, so we've got expenses budgeted about $1.3 million. And this one is a decrease of about $117,000 as compared to last year. This is really a reduction in transfer to reserves as compared to last year. And this is because all of the surplus funds that we're collecting in the water fund this year that are not being used for operations are going to be put towards partially funding the current year capital program. And so some of the areas in the expenses that are increased, we're seeing an increase in the licenses and permits. And so this is reflecting the amount of additional water that the town's supplying as part of the Zone 3 aquifer expansion. Water governance, I'm continuing to put in $20,000 to support the work that's being done in that area by council. The wells, reservoirs, and booster stations, we do have some additional costs. That we have a new remote alarm monitoring protection in place, and that's increasing some costs. But as I mentioned in the long-term financial plan, we're seeing very significant savings by not having to purchase the bulk water, and that was the intent of that expansion project. So a lot of savings there that's helping us to fund other areas and then some. So The transmission and distribution, you're going to see there that there's an increase, but that really is because it's reflecting costs that were considered previously assigned to, we had some cost centers for hydrant maintenance, flushing and valve exercising, and the request was just to collapse all of those into the transmission and distribution section. And so that's why that area is increasing. The one line in that section that is increasing, you'll notice, is electricity costs. And so this year it's up to about $84,000 for the budget. And this is, again, additional costs required to service the Zone 3 aquifer with water, or Zone 3 with aquifer water. But again, this is covered by the reduction in bulk water costs that we used to have to pay the regional district. Under the fiscal services, so as you remember, in 2019, council approved that 3.3 million for the Zone 3 expansion. So far we've allocated about almost 2.5 million of this debt has been incurred, and then the remaining will coincide with the completion of well 6, which is planned for this year. So overall, with the revenues and expenses, the surplus is geared to be about $680,000, and that's quite large, but that's going to be put all towards funding part of our capital program this year, as you're going to see in the budget that Dave provides later in the meeting. And so in my report, page 4 just shows some pie chart versions of all of the numbers on that spreadsheet. Page 6, you're going to notice the reserve and debt balances. They're still in 2020 balances, so just keep that in mind. It's like I'm not able to provide 2021 yet. They're not quite available. We're actually still getting a couple of invoices from 2021 that we're having to deal with. So I'm working on that, and we'll provide those as soon as I can. The report in the policy section, it does provide how the operations budget aligns with council's strategic plan objectives. And so overall, from a financial plan implication, so this proposed budget follows the long-term financial plan, and it will be incorporated into the sort of overall consolidated 5-year financial plan that council adopts as part of the budget process. It's right at this point, I'm providing the operations budget for review, and it's the recommendation that council support the revenue increases as proposed. And so as mentioned earlier, next step, I will bring a draft motion to the February 15th council meeting, and that would have the proposed 5% increase for the water parcel tax and user fees. And then based on direction given at that time, I would bring an amended rates, fees, and charges bylaw to the March 1st meeting for 3 readings, and then March 15th for adoption. And then that's make sure that we have the bylaw in place ahead of the utility billing cycle, which begins April 1st. And the tax bylaw, the parcel tax bylaw, comes a bit later. It comes along with the annual tax rate bylaws that are brought to council in April. And that's because the tax bylaws apply to the calendar year, where other bylaws apply as of the date that they are adopted. So that's a quick version of the operation budget to, and again, allow council time to ask some questions. So let us know if you have any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, I'll go to council for questions. Councilor Diandrat?
Thank you, Mayor. I have actually a technical question. On page 2 of the report, when it says the 3 supply wells, and they describe the cubic meter capacity a day, is this capacity related to what the ministry permit us to use, or is the general capacity of the well? Or just the potential of the well?
I would pass that over to Director of Infrastructure to answer, if you could, Dave.
It's kind of a bit of both, but yes, the capacity is the capacity of the well. And so what that well is able to be delivered, what volume that well is able to be delivered. But we cannot, if you total all the volumes together and they exceed our license, we can't pump them that much. It's just physically how much they are able to pump.
So what is the combine of our license?
I couldn't give you that number off the top of my head, but I can get that for you.
Okay, that's great.
It's not a number I have off the top of my head, unless there's anybody else, Paul, who may be in the meeting that can answer that.
Okay, you can send me later. Thank you.
Okay.
Dave, a related question there. When do you anticipate well number 6 could come online?
Good question. So we have a tender out right now for well 6, which closes in, I think, about a week. We will be reporting to council in February with the results of that tender. At that time, council will have a decision to make. If we do not yet have our license for an increased volume, then we can still bring that well online, but we cannot increase the total volume that we can pump out of the ground. However, well 6 would provide us with redundancy in our system, which is extremely important while we wait for the license. If we have the license, then we're good to go. We get an increased volume that we are able to draw out of the aquifer. I have poked Brian Robinson politely, and we're playing a little bit of telephone tag right now as to the status of that license. So we have a very good rapport with the province on that, and very open communication. So if council chooses to award it, we're looking to try and get that well 6 online roughly June of this year. And our thinking was, well, for starters, we want to get the well online, period. But if we get it online in June, then the town would actually be in a position to be able to deliver more water to the regional district should they run short this summer, because their Church Road well is not going to be online until possibly 2023, but not for 2022 for sure. So long answer to a short question, but it's.
I think the regional district is somewhat optimistic that they could have Church Road up and running by September, but of course that's the optimistic view. So.
Yes, and it misses the hot months of July and August, and who knows how that will pan out this year.
Councillor Crowell.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. And sort of while we're on this topic of license, because I was going to bring it up later, and this would be to the Director of Infrastructure. If I'm not mistaken, we actually applied for our license before the regional district, or certainly around the same time. And they seem to have acquired approval of their license, and we're still patiently waiting. And I'm just wondering why.
I would be speculating. However, the ministry could have been considering the water emergency that the SCRD was in last year, as opposed to the town where we do not have an emergency. That may have come into their decision making. I don't know.
But in follow up to that, if I may, we ended up providing them with water, which would, with the position we are with well number 6, even if they were in an emergency situation, we would be in a better position to help them than their timeline for getting Church Road up and running.
And that's certainly our argument. And I'm looking forward to a conversation with Brian and hoping that will be a positive outcome on that.
Thank you.
David, a little bit of a Star Wars type question, but are there any communities that are using their wells, either their wells or their sewer lines or their sewer treatment plant to generate electricity?
Yes, the water mains, we did look into it, on a fairly cursory look, and the size of our water mains was not appropriate sizing for, they weren't large enough to warrant generating electricity and having other power and so on. And same was looked at the sanitary, and again, I think there was the same issue that we did not have the size, I suppose, to warrant.
just wondering if the outfall line would be sufficient in size to generate electricity.
The challenge with the outfall is that it's not constant.
Yeah.
So you'll
Yeah.
get, you'll get once every, I don't know, 20 minutes or whatever, or maybe longer than that. And so you only get brief moments when it's up and running.
Enough to charge batteries, perhaps. Councilor Ludwig?
Just a really interesting comment, Mayor Beamish. Even if it was an outflow situation where we're contributing back to the grid, that would be an interesting to think about in the future, like particularly here on Gibson's Way down to Gibson's Creek, a water wheel IPP type thing. That's an interesting thought.
Be an interesting project to revisit sometime with the increased populations coming on board. The wind is not reliable either, but it's reliable enough to charge batteries and to wait for the next wind to come along. So it could be something that might be able to, even if it's just putting back into our plant for our operations.
Yeah.
And of course, it would cost millions of dollars, so it doesn't make it economical, but it would be interesting to see if that was a feasible thing. It seems to be a resource that we're not capturing any use of as a flow of either the water or of the sewer. So, okay, any further questions? I'm just checking my notes on my pages here.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if we could ask the corporate officer to move Paul over. He's our operator at the plant that can answer some of those questions in regards to the volume of water better than I can.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, it looks like Paul is over.
Yeah.
May I, Mr. Mayor, with your permission?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Paul, yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing with council what our license allows for draw on our aquifer, that would be great. And any other bits that you've overheard as well.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Our total annual license is 739,530 cubic meters total for the year, which averages at 2,026 cubic meters per day. And so taking into account the high use summer and the low use winter, our wells have a higher capacity than we're allowed to take or allowed to draw annually.
I'm sorry, could you go back to that, what we're permitted for, Paul? Sorry.
Yeah, 739,530.
Okay, and we're drawing, and how much are we drawing? So that's based on an average then of 2,026 per day. What are we actually drawing?
I'll look up some, just give me a sec for that.
Yeah.
It does vary, but right now we're say around 2,000 cubic meters per day tops.
2,000
cubic meters per day.
Okay.
Just under that. And we can go as low as say 1,800 cubic meters per day, but we are a lot closer since we put zone 3 online for Parkland. We got very close to that annual allotment for 2021.
Right. So yeah. So even though we could draw more, we don't perhaps have permit to draw more at this point in time. Do we need to increase our permit?
Mr. Mayor, that is the license application that we have in at the moment.
Okay, that's what we have in right now.
Yeah, volume,
okay, good. Okay, good. Okay. Councillor Kroll?
You actually sort of captured my question, because obviously if we're getting up to 2,000 cubic meters per day with looking at the projected new development and obviously a increase in water demand. So we have this application in. One of the things I was going to ask with respect to wastewater, do Vancouver Coastal Health monitor our discharge water for COVID content?
Mr. Mayor, I defer to Paul on that. I suspect the answer is no, but Paul can tell us for sure.
Go ahead, Paul.
I have not heard conclusively that they do, but interestingly enough, I did just get an email from our drinking water protection officer, Darren, and he asked that question of me, whether we were doing that and if I knew anybody else was. And so I'm not sure at this moment who is doing that, but we are not, and Sea Shelt is not.
Okay, thank you.
How would we do that, Paul? Is that something we would then run tests and submit them to a lab?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact answer there, but conceivably that's what we would do. I'm sure we would be provided with a sampling bottle and protocol, and we'd follow it. I'm not sure if somebody would have to actually come in here to do it or we would do it ourselves, but I know it's totally possible.
Good, right. Thank you. Councilor Dindrat?
Thank you. It's just a curiosity. I'm just trying to understand the ratio, the water consumption between winter peak, the peak of winter and the peak of summer. Just is it double? It gets to the triple?
Again, Mr. Mayor, I'd defer to Paul on this. However, I do want to make one mention is one thing that skews the conclusions you can draw from that is in the winter, you've got I&I. So you got inflow and infiltration. And so that can kind of skew the results because you're getting a larger volume of groundwater into the treatment plant as well. But Paul may be able to add further to that.
Yeah, I think Councilor Dindrat's question, if I'm not mistaken, was around water consumption as opposed to sewer.
Yes.
Oh, my apologies.
How does it vary on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis?
And that's Paul again.
Paul, do you have that at your fingertips?
I have our logbook at my fingertips. I don't have the computer open, but I'm looking at our numbers in the winter, and our totals again are under that 2,000 that I talked about. And in the summer, we're looking closer to 2,800 to 3,000.
Okay.
In our peak heat days. Looking at some of our higher days being around the 3,000 cubic meter per day.
Yeah. So given the permitted volume and the daily averages we're doing, we're running fairly close to our permitted amounts on an annual basis then.
Correct.
Okay. Does the province have any leeway for running over that? Do they, or is that a firm number? If we run over by mistake, or is there 10% overage we're allowed to have?
I would say that the ministry wouldn't be giving us a buffer. It's more staying in communication with them. In regards to if we are going to be having any problems with that. And it's in this case, it's just a matter of timing. I mean, we quite honestly, we thought we fully expected to get our license a couple of years ago, with the noises that they were making at that time. And so it's just a matter of timing. To be honest with you, I'm not overly concerned that the ministry is going to come down hard on us or anything like that, especially considering how long we have been waiting for this additional volume and the delays that have occurred, and also the fact that we are attempting to be there for our neighbor for that extra volume of water.
What is the additional volume we're asking for? Do you know that offhand?
Paul, do you know that offhand? I know who does, and she's not on the call, so. Paul, do
I
you
would
happen to know that?
I would have to look that up. I don't know
Yeah.
off the
Okay.
top of my head yet.
Because it appears we need to kind of push up to 800,000 or almost a million in order to anticipate all the growth we have on the books.
Yes, I seem to recall we're in excess of 1 million with what we've got currently.
Yeah.
Because we were, I believe we're around the volumes that we're asking, I think we were around an 8,000 population that would be sufficient for.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, okay. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dave, for that. And council, any further questions on this report? Councilor Dean.
Yeah, it's just, it will be nice to know, because the summer consumption, there's a better between 2,800 to 3,000 or can peak, but winter under 2,000, I was just curious, is it more like 800 or, or 1,500, just to have just trying to understand the ratio between winter consumption and summer consumption, how this really changed, right, with tourism and obviously the heat combined. So if this would be possible, even if
I believe that 1,800 was what Paul said, I believe.
Oh, 1,800?
I believe 2,000, 1,800, 2,000, I think.
Maybe we could have a bit more detail on that when this comes back to us in the next next budget meeting.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Actually, if I could make a suggestion, those kind of basic numbers, we could easily include on our quarterly report.
Mhm.
They would largely remain unchanged from quarter to quarter, but typical summer volume, typical winter volume. It's just kind of like almost like an FYI for council to have those numbers up there, uppermost in their mind when they're talking to people or making decisions.
Yeah. I guess it's possible at some point in time when we are fully automated on our meters as well, that information could be direct online, that on a daily basis, you can go back and you can go in and see, well, how much water do people use today? It would be possible. Okay, I think we resolved or exhausted that conversation. Now we'll go on to the next one. Director of Finance would be the 3.3, the 2022 preliminary sewer operating budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So again, I'll keep this brief so council or committee has an opportunity to ask questions of staff. So total for 2022 sewer operating budget, revenue transfers reserves are budgeted to be just over $2.2 million. This is an increase of about 274,000 as compared to last year. And it's the majority really is about increases to parcel taxes and user fees. And just like with water, we're getting an additional 54 parcels that are being connected. So we're going to get 54 more parcel taxes to user fees once the properties are connected to the sanitary system. Again, I'm sticking with the 5% recommendation, 5% increase to parcel taxes and user fees for 2022. This year, the revenue is also noticing a transfer of reserves of just over $297,000. And this really is a timing issue having to do with the challenges that we're having of getting our projects done. So certain preventative activities were once again delayed in 2021. And so the main one is the CCTV flushing and videoing project. And so this current year budget is going to reflect 2 years of that project, so a total of 188,000. And this is money that council had set aside previously, and so I'm just transferring it to reserves unspent this year and then pulling it back next year to fund the 2022 combined project. And so for this, an RFP was issued in late 2021 for the project, and staff are bringing an award recommendation to council in early February to get that works so we can get it completed in 2022. And then in that project, previously it's been done, and it generates, identifies areas that need repairs. And so 2022, there's $70,000 in funding being carried forward to complete those repairs that we couldn't do in 2021. From an expense side, so operating expenses are budgeted to be just over $2.2 million. And this is an increase of about 273,000 as compared to last year. And so of that 2.2 million, as I just mentioned, 258 of that thousand relates to the projects carried forward. So I'm pulling the revenue in, but I'm also then showing the expenses in the current year. And there's also a transfer to reserves of about 215,000, and that's basically funding that's collected through operations that isn't needed for operations this year and can partially fund capital program, and then the remainder is going into capital reserves. And so under expense areas, one of the areas that we're seeing, and this is across water, sewer, and general, is insurance costs are continuing to increase. And this is not only reflecting the increased infrastructure that we have, but the just increase in pricing in the overall insurance market's getting quite challenging. But we are still get our insurance through MIABC, so we do get the benefit of a group rate there. The collection section, we're allocating more staff to this area to reflect the additional work plan this year. And again, crews will be focusing on making the repairs of the most damaged sections of pipe that were found during past year's inspection. And this section also includes that CCTV flushing and smoke testing program as well. The treatment plant is a big section under our sanitary sewer ops. And so staffing allocation has increased in this area by about $50,000. And this is to reflect the additional resources required to run the plant as well as the outstations. But we are seeing some corresponding efficiencies happening here, which is really great news. So we're seeing a reduction over time because the work the team's been doing over the last few years is reducing callouts, and we're also added improvements to remote access. So it makes it a lot easier to troubleshoot. We've also got a reduction in the cost and reliance on long-term contracting because we are now developing internal expertise for that. So there's another efficiency saving there. And we're also seeing an improvement of project prioritization and information available for decision-making. So we're seeing lots of good efficiencies coming out of the efforts that are being made at the treatment plant. Repairs and maintenance for the plant, the budget this year is budgeted to be a little over $40,000 more than last year. And the main part of this is the purchase of, one part of it is the purchase of critical spare parts that were identified last year in a review of inventory. And this is focusing on really having these parts on hand to make sure that we have them available because they can be difficult to get on short notice, that we were not scrambling when a piece goes down. So those critical parts have been identified, and we're prioritizing getting those in our inventory so they are readily available when we need them. On page 4 of my report, that's where SCADA is listed, and it's showing a reduction as to some of the costs that we really used to rely on external contractor is now being done internally. We have a operations and instrumentation technician, and so he's able to do that work in-house now. And lastly, under the fiscal services, we have 2 transfers to reserves that are built into the budget. $50,000 is just a straight transfer of the estimated excess services charges that we collect from developers during the year. So that's really in and out. I show it in revenue coming in, and I show it in a transfer going out. And that goes into reserve that helps pay for the debt servicing for the Prowse Road lift station project. And also we have a $165,000 roughly transfer to capital reserves. And this is the excess over what we need for operations, as well as partial funding for the current year capital program that Dave will go through in the next section. And so overall, the net surplus for capital that we need this year is just over $81,000. And then, like I said, the remainder of 165 goes into 165,000 goes into capital. And so, like the water, I've got on page 5, I've got graphs that sort of break down those numbers in a pie chart to make it a bit easier to see. Page 7 shows how the operations of the sewer sanitary service is supporting council's strategic plan. And in terms of managing our assets this year, there's 3 focuses for this upcoming year. We're looking at focusing on safety, information quality, and accessibility. And we're also looking at database planning that incorporates not only risk, but service levels and long-term costs. So some really great work being done there by staff. And so as with water, the financial plan implication is that this budget follows a long-term financial plan that I've reviewed and proposed for the sewer fund, and it'll be incorporated into the consolidated financial plan that council adopts later in the budget process. I'll bring a recommendation for the 5% annual increase to council on February 15th for recommended for adoption at that meeting, and then it'll travel through the same timing as the water rates, and make sure we get those bylaws in place so we can implement that 5% in a timely manner when we need it. And so that's my quick version of sanitary sewer to provide opportunity for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions? Advise any? Okay. If I may then, in terms of on page 3 of your report, and I think Dave's probably the best to answer this, is going to be on collection. It refers to crews will focus on making repairs to the most damaged sections of pipe found during the past 3 inspections. Whereabouts are those areas, Dave, where you have the biggest problem?
We can't tell you that. It's need to know only. No, it's we know roughly the kind of dollar value that we're looking at and the number of places. However, we don't have a specific area that has been identified as an issue. Having said that, the broad area that is showing a higher rate of inflow and infiltration is the gravity section. And so half of the town, gravity straight to the plant, half of the town goes down to Krause Road lift station. And so the half of the town running pretty much, if you were to come down North Road and keep going straight all the way down to the water, the portion to the west is gravity, portion to the east is the lift station. So that Upper Gibson's, O'Shea, Eagle View, that or Eagle View, yeah. That area is the has the highest, but I can't at this point. I can't narrow that any further for you. But we will have the information to show you that hopefully by the end of this year.
What is the condition of the pipe on the waterfront? Is that due for replacement? Are there issues around there with water table rise and climate change?
I would say that it's something that we're looking at, and I'm going to speak a little bit further to when we talk about the capital works. We have done some repairs and rehabilitation to manholes in the, I don't know if you noticed or are aware, but there are several manholes that are actually go underwater during high tide. And that's, we know that they're sealed properly. And there is a higher incidence of I&I coming from the one direction. I believe it's towards the bluff. We do salinity tests on that just to determine that. But what we are also looking at is the future of the trunk line as to whether that is still the way we want to be collecting the sewage from the lower reaches of Gibson's, and how rising sea levels can affect that. The other way that it can actually affect it, and we've seen it, is where wave action is actually eroding the protective outer concrete. And we did do some repairs, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe, to some of that were to be exposed. So we're on that, and part of our capital works, as I say, I'll speak a little bit further to that as to what our plans are in that regard.
And we had the annual complaints about smells from the sewer treatment plant this year. What plans are in place to deal with that, or is there going forward?
So we've had a consultant working on that for us. He's provided, or they provided, some preliminary observations and measurements. However, in consultation with Paul, the chief operator there at the plant, we want to, for starters, gather a little bit more information through a full year after making some operational changes to the plant. And there are also some changes that we want to make this year that would get the plant running the way it should be, so that we have so that we design an odor control system that is appropriate to the plant in operating as it is supposed to be, with regular cleaning of diffusers, etc. And the plant operators have been working at that over, probably the past 4 years. And there's 1, 2, 3 things left to do that they would like to do before a final odor control system has been, a recommendation has been determined.
Yeah. I have one more question. I don't see if council has any questions yet. Think about them. Okay, Councilor Crowell, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary Beamish. I guess hand up isn't working. You captured a couple of the things I was going to ask. And this is not so much sewage, it's a water probably issue. When a new home is being constructed and a water hookup is connected, I've assumed that the town does the initial connection from the water main to the meter for that home. Would that be correct?
That's yes and no. If it is a new connection to an existing pipe, like in our like an infill property, then yes, we do that. However, for example, with Parkland, where it's a whole new subdivision, then the developer's contractor is responsible for not only installing the pipe, but installing the service connections to each one of those lots.
Okay. The reason I ask is, and I think it's been brought to staff's attention, there's a new construction on Steinbrenner, and you can see where the initial cut was made across the road for the water installation. The cut was patched. Now it's sinking. Now the road either side of that cut is cracking and crumbling, which suggests it possibly wasn't properly backfilled or whatever. Excuse me. And now one of the neighbors' driveways is cracking and crumbling. So who would be responsible for that? Is that a town thing, or is it the contractor who requested the water hookup?
So in general, the cuts for any utility, we have changed our standards in order to make sure that that sort of thing is addressed. And so if the town forces put it in, then it's the town's forces that are responsible. If it is a contractor or hydro or gas, they would be held responsible.
Okay. It's just that it is a deteriorating situation, and it doesn't seem to be going away. So I was just wondering if it was a town issue or someone should be following up with the contractor.
I believe that we are aware of it, and and are following up on it. This is the first that I've heard of it, but that's what I understand.
Okay, thank you.
I'm in communication with my forces as we speak. So I understand it's actually a hydro trench.
I'm sorry?
I understand it's actually a hydro trench, not water.
Okay, it's in the area of about 720 Steinbrenner.
Yeah. And so we will be talking to hydro about that,
Okay, thank you.
or have been.
Councillor Ludwig. Oh, sorry, I do have one final question, Mr. Newman. One is latecomers. Probably where there's one gentleman has an issue on latecomer fees relative to Proust Road. Could you explain to us how latecomer fees are collected and on what circumstances?
So broadly speaking, latecomers are when a party constructs something, a piece of infrastructure that benefits not only themselves, but future developers. And the town is responsible to identify when latecomers are warranted, and then determines which properties benefit and what that cost or charge is to each of those benefiting properties. And that most often is when it is a developer doing those works. So for example, we actually have a water and a sanitary latecomers that was part of a developer's responsibilities for constructing infrastructure in Upper Gibsons. The town, is responsible to collect those latecomers as properties develop, and then they remit those charges to the developer. In the Proust Road instance, the developer, in fact, was the town. And so there was there's a portion of the Proust Road lift station that was paid by development cost charges. And then the town also incurred debt. Part of it was eligible for DCCs. The remaining part of the project, the debt-funded project, is being collected through latecomers. And so that latecomers is applied to any development that occurs within the collection area of the Proust Road lift station. So in this case, from North Road over to the east, and is applied to any type of development that increases flows to the Proust Road lift station. And based on those properties, the number of properties and the cost of the lift station, that's how the unit costs were established. And so I'm fairly certain I'm aware of the particular incident that you're referring to, and staff actually are going to be coming back to council with an update on the Proust Road lift station. It's called, I think, the excess services bylaw, where we're at, rather than using the estimated costs, we now have the complete actual costs. And so there will be adjustments recommended to be made to the unit charges for latecomers. At that time, council could also discuss the impacts of I suppose keeping some people, such as secondary suites, for example, that they would not have to pay the latecomers, and what circumstances would that be, and what impact on our finances would be.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to get into specifics right now. I just want that kind of primer on latecomers so the council understands what that's about.
Sure. Hopefully that was
appreciate
clear
that.
enough.
give rise to any further questions, council? If not, Councillor Lumley, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the explanation. Anyway, we don't have to get into it today, but it would amaze me that we would have other circumstances where people could get out of latecomers and some people can't. So anyway, that's my thoughts on it. If town's expending money, you can see the costs, you can see the budgets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to get paid for. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. We'll obviously address that another time. So thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Director of Finance, for that, and thank you for your support, Paul, and Director of Infrastructure. It looks like Director of Finance, you are finished.
Yes,
And we now go to the Director of Infrastructure for the 2022-2026 Water and Sewer 5-year capital plan, which Council has copied of and also on the system. So if Council wants, it's easier. I find it easier to have that than the screen. So just let staff know if you want this kind of thing printed out for you. It's so hard to read on the small screen. So, Mr. Newman, over to you.
So I've just shared my screen. Could you please confirm that you can see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I can also zoom in a little bit to make the printing a little bit larger, so maybe it's not quite as small on your screen. How's that? Is that visible enough for you?
It's quite readable, yep.
Good, okay. So this is the 2022 plan for capital works for water. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly when I can and then open it up to questions. So aquifer mapping update is just the carryover for the completion of that work. We are still expecting the report shortly. And as I say, that's just committed works. Zone 3 well 6 pump, that's when you're going to be seeing the tender results come in to you in February. And there may be some refinement of that budget number that we've got in there, the 1.6 million, depending on the tenders received. It's pretty difficult to budget these days because of availability of products, and it's often we don't have a clue as to what products are or a full list of products that are difficult to obtain or have seen a large price increase. We'll cross our fingers that we will not see an increase to that number. Reservoir condition assessments, that should carry over just to complete some work at the Parkland reservoir. So the water audit update, that is looking at our system to determine what our leakage index is. So when we're talking about water usage, not only is it the water that's actually coming out of people's taps and the tracking of leaks in their services, it's also our own system. And council's been pretty consistent with budgeting a reasonable amount towards water main replacement, and that will actually reduce our water usage from the aquifer because we are replacing older, potentially or likely leaking pipes with new pipes. So that'll give us a snapshot as to where we are today in comparison to the last audit, which I think was about 5 years ago. Water main replacement, there's our standard budget for water mains. We'll leave it open at this point as to which mains will be replaced, because we have to coordinate that with some general works, which we have not fully wrapped our heads around. However, at this point, we're looking at Venture Way is likely one of the water mains, as well as on CCOT, not CCOT, Seamount. Cross-connection control management, that's for some improvements to some of the chambers that are housing our cross-connection control valves at the service connections. Well-free pump house improvements is to fund kind of a separation of the chlorine delivery system to provide a separation between that and our electrical components, because chlorine is highly corrosive. So this has just been on our list for a little while to be doing that, and we hope to be doing that this year. Meter management is replacing some of our older meters, and one of the benefits to that is the older meters are not only starting to become due for replacement, but what we replace them with are meters that are able to give far more information to staff as well as the public should they have a concern about their water usage or leakage. And last, well, not quite lastly, but is the OCP update completion for DPA 9, the aquifer protections. So we've started that. Some of the work with that ties into the aquifer mapping. So we've seen a lot of integration with Source to Sea, aquifer mapping, and DPA 9. The last item, the integrated model for surface and groundwater, is also furthering our understanding of the aquifer, but at this point it is unfunded. We do not have available funds to complete that project, and however, it could be a grant or eligible for a grant. So we have that on the list for our council to be able to see some of these projects that almost can get pre-approved for a grant, so that we're being efficient and not having to come back and forth to council to determine what projects should be funded by a grant should the opportunity arise. So that is the 2022. More than happy to take some questions at this point, Mr. Mayor, and then we'll take a quick look at the 5-year.
Thank you. And Council, is Councilor Crowell?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. And just a question, Director Newman. We obviously are aware of how much water we pump, and we're aware of how much we are charging users because of the metering. So I'm assuming the difference would be leaks. And
Would be leaks. It would be operational. So for example, we do an annual flushing program, and that water at this point is not metered. You have fire flow, and you have, as you say, leakage.
okay, so it does make it sort of difficult to determine between the flushing and fire flow what we do have in leaks.
Yes, there are some assumptions typically made in an audit as to what percentages, and they identify what unmetered water we would be using, such as for the flushing or for fire. And we are working towards reducing the amount of unknowns we have with our water system, and trying to meter that water even for operational purposes wherever we can.
Just a follow up, if I may.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
I sit on the fire commission, and I haven't thought to ask them this. They're aware of how many gallons they pump a minute through their trucks. So fire flow potentially could be monitored.
That's fair enough. Yes, that is something that we could pursue. The other thing we also have with fire hydrant use is for construction, and we're looking at putting together a unit with a meter and backflow, and that's what contractors would have to use. So as I say, working at narrowing down the unknowns on that. But good point in regards to the amount of water the fire department uses. I'd be curious to not from you, Councillor, but unless you happen to know, do they keep a tally, an annual tally on how much water or that they use, or how many hours or minutes or whatever?
It is. I think it is a valid issue. I know one of their trucks is capable of pumping, what is it, 1,000 gallons a second,
Mhm.
And it's capable of dispersing that onto a fire, as was the case with the fire on Park Road in the condo complex. So, I'll do a follow-up, because I think if they can help us fine tune our within the boundaries of the town, our use, it would help, get a better grasp on potential leaks.
The other thing that I do want to do is to try and narrow down the areas in town where we have the most leaks. My default, I suppose, would be oldest mains in the highest pressure areas, and then focusing on those for our water main replacements.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Ladwig, before you do, I have to just step out for a minute, so just keep the conversation going. If I don't get back, keep it going. I'll be back.
Thanks, Mr. Newman. I have a question regarding the discharge study that we discussed a few weeks ago for Upper Gibsons in relation to some concerns from Area E residents. I assume it's not shown here because we had discussed, or council had discussed, budgeting, taking that out of this year's budget.
When we talk water, we're talking potable water, we're not talking drainage water. So you'll be seeing that in the general.
Okay.
When we speak about general. So right now we're doing just water and sanitary. And as I say, water is only potable water, not drainage water.
Okay, thank you.
In the absence of Mayor Beamish, does anyone else have any questions? Would you like to proceed then, Director Newman?
Sure. So I'll just go briefly over to the 5-year. And we've got, we actually weren't able to do as much as we wanted this year on known water mains or water services that are known to be problematic from Public Works reports as to how often they are repairing mains or replacing services. And ABS road service replacement got bumped from 2022 to 2023 because of funding. We've got a 2-phase McCall Road, or McCall Lane, is it? Anyway, McCall Lane, I think, which is that gravel laneway that crosses Beach. That main has been problematic for a while, and we are anxious to get to it, but difficult to fund it. We also have a school road seismic assessment that needs to be done, and we've got that budgeted for 2023. And I think probably that's all I would be really concerned about bringing to your attention for 2023. We have, although we do not yet have the aquifer mapping report, we have started putting in some money starting in 2024. I'm trying to think if we did it. Yeah, actually we did it in 2023, moving forward to address any of the recommendations that we are anticipating coming from the aquifer mapping report. That 45,000, 47,000 exact, et cetera, will be refined once we know what those recommendations were or are going to be. So at this point, that's largely kind of a placeholder, And we're looking at around that amount to address one or more of the recommendations from the study. We've got a potential expensive seismic upgrade to the School Road reservoir. And we go on with our water main replacements. And then that, I believe, is the second phase of the McCall Lane water main replacement. With the McCall Lane, not only do we have the water main to replace, we also need to grade it, address existing drainage issues, and potentially look at putting perhaps a chip seal surface on it, which is now, as I say, gravel. And so some of these projects spill over into general or overlap general, and it's trying to come up with the right number when general, or the right year when general has the funds as well as water to enable us to proceed with some of these projects. If there's any questions on the 5-year, happy to take those, and then we can move on to the 2022 sanitary.
Councilor Crowell?
Thank you. In the reporting, I noticed the reservoir capacity we have between Parkland and School Road. And I was just wondering, with several things, climate change, having a greater buffer even for fire protection, what's in the cards for increasing reservoir capacity?
We have no plans at this point to increase reservoir capacity. However, we are reliant on the regional district for some fire storage for Zone 3. And the way our system works, it kind of cascades through our 3 water zones. So if we start running short in Zone 1, which draws off the School Road reservoir, we start running short in Zone 1, for instance, in the event of a fire, it will allow a valve to open, which will provide access to the water in Parkland Reservoir. Should that not become enough, we then draw and cascade water from the SCRD through our zones. The way that we can, in a way, increase our reservoir capacity is by reduced water use, whether that is by the property owner reducing their per capita usage, or the town reducing the lost water from leaks and so on. So in a way, council authorizing water main replacements, in a way you're increasing capacity in the reservoir by doing the same thing. If you get me.
Just in follow-up to that, Director Newman, because just this past the past few months, there was an EOC activated because of a landslide in the main water line to the south coast for the RD being compromised.
Mhm.
So had that water line been breached, I'm assuming the south coast, we would have found ourselves in the position again of supplying the RD with water. But by the same token, had that been compromised, it to me, it's just indicating our potential vulnerability, relying totally on our neighbor with a one pipe system. Now, I'm assuming if Church Road comes online, and the regional district has discovered their Achilles heel with this water, the vulnerability of the water line in the area of the airport. If the Church Road well is online, I'm assuming we could receive water through the Church Road system. Would that be correct?
I couldn't say that definitively. I would suspect that you would probably right, knowing where some of the pipes are planned. I don't know to what degree or what kind of volume, but I think the questions that you're asking are certainly supporting the idea of regional water governance, because we can't be siloed in our water supplies. We need to be able to lean on each other in emergencies and plan for what might be happening down the road.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a question in terms of the aquifer outside of the town. Is there anything we're doing or planning in terms of aquifer protection, aquifer security? There is a grant program that the province is putting forward, and we'll probably have more information about it in the next weeks. But I'm just wondering, should we be allocating funds for, we talk about signage, lobbying the province? It's such an important issue that if anything went happen to that, or if anything has happened to it that we're not already aware of, we're so vulnerable in our water system, and the regional district will be too with their church road well. I'm kind of waiting for the waterline report to come in, and also the source to sea project, but I'm wondering if we should be anticipating putting money in the budget for some kind of action relative to the aquifer protection outside the community.
The senior staff from the town, as well as the SCRD, have been meeting and are bringing up these sort of issues that could affect both of us, kind of a fringe area, those fringe areas. Personally, I feel like the first step is for the SCRD to have in place similar bylaws as we do. Yep. To protect the aquifer, because the aquifer doesn't recognize the political boundaries, obviously. Right. And I believe that the town has quite good regulations around the aquifer, and if we are able to get the SCRD to adopt those similar bylaws, then I think that goes a long way to protection of the aquifer. Again, this whole concept of regional governance, and at a staff level, we have a pretty reasonable communication between SCRD staff as well. But that's certainly something that I could see going the longest as far as protection of the aquifer outside of town boundaries.
Yeah, I think we also need to include the Squamish Nation, which has a lot of weight in this process of aquifer protection. I think that we need to, I wonder if we shouldn't be allocating, I'm not sure whether it's here or someplace else, some funds to bring all these parties together in another formal way of, and keep that pressure on to do something, because it's just one of those things that that I believe that it's easier to address a lake or a river as it's running by, sort of thing, that will flush itself to some degree, obviously, than it is an aquifer. And how do we bring that to attention? We need to talk about that. Councillor Crowell, and then Director of Finance.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. We do have monitoring wells outside the town of Gibsons. Is that correct?
We have, I'm not sure if we got more than one. I know we've got one right near the Public Works yard. We did have another one, but had to discontinue using it. I believe it's just the one that we've got. However, I'm thinking we could possibly be using the Mahan well that the SCRD drilled. And
that's within the town.
No, not the Mahan well. That one's just outside of town boundaries. I'm not sure whether that would be of significant benefit to us. We are also working with the province. They have some monitoring wells outside of town boundaries as well. And we need to be working collaboratively with the regional district to have monitoring wells installed in the locations that are going to give us the most information, especially to determine what sort of impact, if any, the Church Road well, for instance, would have over on this side.
Okay, where I was actually going with this is, if we did have wells outside of the town, potentially in the recharge areas, were we testing that water for quality? That's where I was going with that. So presumably, if there are provincial wells, are they monitored for water quality and purity?
Good question. I'm not 100% sure what their parameters are for testing, but it's a good question. The other thing that I'm interested in looking at, and I believe that was in the back of my mind, what one of those aquifer mapping recommendation budgets would be used for, is potential shallow groundwater monitoring along kind of the area of Reed Road, for example, where we're monitoring the water that's coming from up gradient, and trusting that the pollutants in the shallow groundwater, the Capilano aquifer, would be showing up before they show up in the deep aquifer.
Director of Finance and Councilor Ludwig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to bring to council's or committee's attention that there is $20,000 included in the water operations budget for water governance, and that would support the work that you want to do in this area.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, but I think that I really would like it, and I appreciate comments of working already with the SCRD. We need to keep that pressure going forward, and maybe be applying for some of those grant monies that come forward. Councilor Ludwig.
Yeah, this is just a comment for council to think about. I wonder if we should consider forming a regional water governance committee, like the Holland Lands Committee, especially like the Sunset. And so, I mean, at least then we're driving it, and we're asking them to come to the table, even if it's local governments at this point, and then we can slowly start to apply pressure through that committee to like Ministry of Transportation and things like that.
That was part of the recommendation, that our CAO put forward a year or 2 years ago. Interestingly enough, the SCRD, while I missed a meeting there a while back, they appointed me to a watershed committee. So I asked for the terms of reference for it, and I've yet to receive them, and that was commented on. So then, because Donna McMahon and Mark Hiltz were also appointed to the committee, we assumed that it was something in this area here as opposed to Egmont, which doesn't interest me at all. So that the terms of reference for that committee I have not seen. But that what I wanted to do is I talked at one time of an ad hoc committee consisting of local government as well as knowledgeable and interested people from the community, because it's not just ourselves. This is an issue that we all have to pay attention to. So, Councilor Ludwig.
So sorry, just to wrap up. So that's interesting. I would be really curious for us to ask for that terms of reference again.
Yes.
If they don't have it, or they haven't followed through on that particular action item, maybe we should take the lead and just form our own.
Yeah. Well, I will ask again. I know that Donna McMahon asked the second time, and she said, we haven't seen a response to Mr. Beamish's request. So that it's out there. Councilor Kroll.
I was actually guilty. I was covering for you at that regional district meeting when this issue came up, and I did mention the proposal that came, it was at least 18 months ago or longer, with the program that Manny was chairing. And I suggested, because of the other water committee that you're on, that you might be an appropriate chair for this committee.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, we'll see what we can get come together with. So such a big issue, an important issue. Yeah. Okay, Dave, anything further on water projects or any further questions on this page?
Not from me, Mr. Mayor. If you guys are done, then I'll move on to sanitary.
Okay, I'll let you carry on.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so 2022 proposed works, a fairly short list. So the Garrow Point low pressure system is on here to extend sewer service to properties along Garrow Point. I guess you call it south of Franklin towards Secret Beach. There's maybe half a dozen homes. And this is contingent on the developer of 6 lots opposite Franklin Road proceeding this year. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like that is likely. And so this would enable us to extend or connect up to their new infrastructure or the construction of the infrastructure that they're constructing and complete the sewer service to those properties on Garrow Point Road. Wastewater strategic plan update. This is a big one and an important one. This will address some strategic planning for our water collection system, and we'll be looking at the data that we're getting back from the flushing program, for example. Mr. Mayor, you were asking what areas were particularly problematic. It is also looking at the sanitary trunk system, going from the wastewater treatment plant down to the ocean, as well as the outfall itself. It's going to look at the trunk system along the shoreline as well, and come up with a strategy for that. And when I'm talking about a strategy for the trunk, what I mean is, do we continue to feed down to the trunk, or do we do some sort of low pressure system up higher on the roads paralleling the waterfront? And so, for example, if you went towards the bluff, there's, I don't know, about 30 homes maybe that drain down to the trunk. Would it be more cost effective, as well as better in the lights of sea level rise, etc., to put in 30 low pressure systems that would pump upwards to the road above? And that's just an example. I'm not saying that that's happening. It's that sort of thing that we are looking at. And then lastly, it's also going to be incorporating the wastewater treatment plant. So this will be a document that guides some of our sanitary works moving forward. SCADA system improvements, just keeping that, it's largely dealing with computer systems that are no longer supported and need to be replaced. So it's just part of asset management. The wastewater treatment plant OCU, so that's odor control unit. And so, Mr. Mayor, that's again what you were asking about. And so that's completion of that study and collection of information that will help us inform what sort of unit that we need to install to deal with odors. And then lastly, a spare centrifuge pump for the treatment plant, bringing up our capital works to $356,000 for 2022. And happy to take questions at this point, and then we can have a peek at the 5-year.
Council, any questions? Dave, in terms of the odor, where does that emanate from in the plant? What part of the process?
If Paul is still with us, I would be happy to have him answer that one. And I'm not sure if he is or not. I can't see all the participants on my screen.
He's on the screen there, yeah. Paul, are you still there?
Yeah, hi, I'm still here.
Yeah.
So there's odor it's quite difficult just with when we went around to assess, just because it is subjective and there tends to be odor in a lot of locations. So that's why we definitely needed help with specialized equipment that can quantify this odor. And so we have one area that was identified measurably as having odor, which was our digester area. And I know Dave briefly spoke about this, we did some maintenance on it that had not been done in a long time this year that would hopefully help improve this odor. And we will try to operationally change some of our parameters with odor as a large perspective and not just treatment, because there's two. We have to look at the treatment efficiency, but we're looking at how odor plays into that. And from there, I think that we need to evaluate it in the summer when these odors typically, due to our air conditions, hover around the Lower Gibsons area. And without doing that, we can't really tell you today because the odor is definitely lower in the winter anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those hot days, those hot summer days, everything was stewing. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. I just wonder if it's possible to put the main odor producers in some kind of a building or a cover that would then allow us to put a scrubber on that and scrub the air as it escapes. But yeah. Okay.
And I think, Dave spoke to that we need to do some further evaluation to see if we can fine tune the plan for odor control.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Kroll?
Just a question. Years ago, when I was doing property management, one of the joyous properties I had was the Poplars Trailer Park, and we had some odor issues there. And the consultant from the Ministry of the Environment put us onto a company in the States that we actually introduced. They were like little pellets into where the initial holding tanks for the sewage. And as these pellets broke down going through the system, they actually helped reduce the odor. And I'm just wondering, it may not be something that would work with our system, but has anything like that ever been investigated?
I would suggest that would be part of the work that Urban Systems is currently doing for us. I couldn't speak to that directly at this point, though.
Okay, seeing no further questions, we'll move on.
Okie dokie. Our 5-year looks like this. We've got some fairly big ticket items on the horizon for the treatment plant. One is the centrifuge replacement. And at this point, we have that funded by debt. At this point, the Director of Finance isn't seeing any other option for funding that. The centrifuge is an integral part of our system, and it's just reaching the end of its life expectancy. In order here, Georgia low pressure, we had a developer construct, I'm guessing maybe half of the low pressure system, so it comes halfway down the hill and pushes sewage up to Skyline, I guess it is. And this would be a budget to replace or to install the remainder to provide sanitary service down to the lower properties on Georgia. That will be done in conjunction with water main replacement on Georgia Drive as well, and which would be done in 2023. Another bigger ticket item is the Gower Point and Stewart Force Main replacement. You may recall that we did the Prowse Road Force Main replacement as part of the Prowse Road lift station. We still have the section on Gower Point and Stewart Road that is ready to be replaced. We are looking at the possibility of trenchless method of replacing, where you will dig 3 or 4 holes and force, well, there's multiple ways of doing trenchless, but essentially either lining the pipe or bursting the pipe as you pull through a new liner. And so it's less disruptive and potentially less costly, as well as doing an open cut. But regardless, of a fairly big ticket item, and that one is also shown as being funded by debt. maybe that the director of finance speak to that after I've gone to this as what that might look like. We're starting to put in money for sanitary rehabilitation. Now, oh, there's the director of finance with hand up now. Is that, Mr. Mayor, is that with your permission?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. I just wanted to jump in at this point to talk a little bit briefly about that debt while you're on the topic. So the centrifuge replacement debt, that would be brand new debt, but the 586 for the Gower Point Stewart Force Main, the Prowse Road lift station project, that was originally 1.76 million in debt, but it came in under budget. So there's 300,000 of debt that we didn't need to use under that program. And so we won't be drawing that. And so this new issue of 586 in the scheme of things is only about 200. So it's not quite as dire as it looks. So there was a significant savings in the Prowse Road that we won't be drawing on. So we're going to have reduced costs for the Prowse Road debt in the operation. Thanks.
Councilor Dean, follow up.
Sorry.
I'm just wondering if we could get the 950 through some grant. Is it still a possibility? Because I'm just I know the older control system has not been budget in any year, just because we don't know. But if it happens that after a year, that will be budget for perhaps 2023. So that would end up being like over 3 million. But I'm just wondering if the centrifuge, if there's a possibility for getting a grant.
Typically, we don't see grants come in for renewal of existing infrastructure or replacement types things. I think I've seen one, but they don't come around very often. But we're always on the lookout for anything that might be able to qualify for a grant, including, as you mentioned, the odor control unit right there, which we've put in as $1 million because we know we're going to be looking at some sort of cost for the odor control unit. At this point, we've got a range, but we still have more information to gather before we can come up with a real budget number or decent budget number. In a way, this is shown in here to give you, excuse me, to give you a heads up that we have a potential expense coming down the pipe towards us. I want to mention the sewer or sanitary rehabilitation. So we've got an allowance in there moving forward for sanitary rehabilitation. I've got one extra line in there, ignore that. I feel that good progress is being made with our infrastructure, and we're kind of following methodically through. Water obviously was the most important because because obviously the protection of our aquifer, et cetera, is paramount. But those pipes are also pressure pipes. You're running at anywhere from 60 to 160 PSI. And so those are more prone to leakage rather than a gravity sewer system, which can happily flow along at pretty much no pressure at all. So water just naturally floated to the top. The treatment plant was another one where we have spent a lot of time and a lot of council approved money on improving the function of the plant. We're now able to turn our eyes more towards our large collection system, and we will start seeing more of those expenses come forward now. I will be looking at trying to collect enough to warrant a trenchless method of sanitary pipe rehabilitation as well. And so, yeah, just heads up, you'll be seeing a little bit more of that coming through the budget now that we are on top of some of those other key parts of our infrastructure network. Drainage would follow that. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We've got to do a outfall design. The outfall is due for some work. We want to rehabilitate what we have there now, as opposed to doing something brand new, because we can fall under old guidelines rather than a multi-million-dollar project to extend the outfall further out from shore, and where we just do not have the means to fund it. So we're doing our best to carry on with the existing outfall, and I think with some rehabilitation, it will be successful. We'll be fine with that. We've had and identify the work that needs to be done, and you'll see the second phase of it there. The sanitary rehabilitation again showing up. Then we end up in the large sanitary trunk replacement there. And some of those are a small amount as parcel fees. However, the significant part of that is funded by development cost charges. And obviously it will be dependent on the balance that we have in the sanitary development cost charge reserve fund. But we've got that project coming down as well. Some of that work I want to time with development, because Gospel Rock at some point will be installing a siphon, which is very much in a way like a toilet tank, where you've got you flush it and it dumps water from the back and flushes through the toilet. The similar thing with siphon is that there's a collection tank up in Gospel Rock, and then every so often it flushes and sends water down to the wastewater treatment plant, and that volume from flushing allows it to get underneath the creek along Gower Point Road and force its way up to the treatment plant. And I want to try and time the replacement of the trunk with that. So I'm keeping an eye on development to so that we can get the road redone, torn up once, etc. And at this point, we've got some money in there for shoreline trunk rehabilitation, but the strategic plan, the wastewater strategic plan that I mentioned earlier, would likely dictate when and where that happens, and potentially how. So that brings us to the end of the sanitary, and again, more than happy to take any questions.
Council, any questions at this time? No, see none, Dave, but you carry on.
I'm done.
Are you
We have
done?
made it through both water and sanitary.
Yeah.
Way to go. Yeah, I think Director of Finance takes over from here probably.
Okay, yeah, let Director of Finance, so you'd like to wrap this up. There's no resolutions required. We've received all the reports. You can tell us what the next steps will be in this process. Looking at these numbers, Director of Finance.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So next step, I'll be bringing a report to council on the February 15th council meeting, and that will come with a formal recommendation to request the approval for a 5% parcel tax and user fee increase, as was laid out in the financial plans for both water and sewer. And that'll get those increases going in time for the bylaws in place for this budget.
And if council has any further questions at that time of either yourself or the director, I'm sure they could bring them up and be prepared to answer them.
Certainly, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, and brings us into the next section of our inquiry is point 4. That's section of the agenda, which is inquiries, item 4. Are there any persons in the gallery who would like to ask a question of council or have we received any emails? That's one other thing that don't ask often, but you know, during the course of a meeting, somebody might send in an email to the corporate officer, which we could also address in the inquiry section.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I do not see any hands raised. I do not see any emails in my email account. I'm going to check the mayor and council email quickly.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to report from the mayor and council email either.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Paul, thank you for taking time to be with us and everybody else. And we'll move forward. Our next meeting on the budget is going to be Tuesday. Well, it's the next committee of the whole meeting, Tuesday, February the 1st at 3 p.m. The next committee of the whole meeting. And as council is aware, the budget meetings are now set on a regular basis to keep us busy this spring so that we can spend money and have the summer off. So we'll look forward to that. So thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ludwig, thank you. And thank you for seeing your hand. It disappeared again in the shadow there, Councillor Ludwig. But thank you all very much. And we'll see you again. We'll see you for sure next week on Tuesday. Thank you. Take care. And welcome back, Councillor Lumley.
Mayor, you have to ask all in favor.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.